Hello, podcast listeners. We know podcasts are a great way to catch up on a program that you may have missed on KSJE, and it's provided as a free service of this radio station. But you know, KSJE is now listener-supported, and so while you enjoy this podcast, we hope that you'll also take some time to join KSJE. Become a member today. It's quite easy to do. Just go to our website at ksje.com/support and pick the level of support that best matches your budget. Thanks again for listening. Here's your podcast. Well, let me turn to my guests who are here with me this morning to talk a little bit about Dining with the Dead. Rebecca Morgan is here. Good morning and welcome to KSJE. Welcome back to KSJE, I should say. Good to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And I'll talk to you a little bit about your character in just a moment,
Okay.
Who you'll be portraying this year. And then Charley Tyler's also here with us this morning. Charley, good morning to you.
Morning, Scott. Always enjoy being here.
Thank you for coming in as well, to you as well. And Rebecca, let me turn back to you a little bit. And you are portraying Lucille Alban McDonald. And that name, the McDonald name for sure, probably is familiar to folks maybe who are familiar with Farmington history. But tell us a little bit about her this year.
She was quite an interesting woman. Probably would have a whole string of diagnoses if she were alive today. She married a man in North Carolina, had 3 children with him, and then tuberculosis brought them to, brought them to San Juan County. He lived for a couple of years after they came, and then she began a succession of relationships with I would say certifiably unsavory characters.
All right. I was going to use the word colorful, but unsavory, maybe too.
Well, one of them was actually executed for murdering his previous wife.
Okay.
So, and then
this is around the era, where are we talking about, early 1900s?
Yes, in the early 1900s.
Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Right.
And so
Now,
yeah.
she still has heirs that live here.
Right.
And so I'm going to be in conversation with her family. So I tell the story in a thoughtful, respectful way with a little bit of color because she was quite a feisty gal.
And there's lots of little anecdotes about her, I think,
That's
too,
right.
to share, which
Very
is
much.
always exciting. And so I wanted to mention to everyone, of course, if you're not familiar with Dining with the Dead, although this is the 7th year that this has been going on. It is in September at Farmington's Green Lawn Cemetery, and it is, if you see the list on the screen, everyone, there are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of us who will be out in the cemetery portraying these different characters from San Juan County's past, and then groups come on September 7th, and they have dinner, which is the dining part, and then they go on a tour throughout the cemetery, which is the dead part, and that's where we come in, because we all portray these characters from Farmington and San Juan County's past. And so that's kind of what we're talking about this morning, everybody. The event has sold out every year, and so if you're interested, certainly we invite you to get your tickets sooner than later. And the proceeds, as we mentioned, go to the Kiwanis Children's Projects, and there's a list of the performers. And so, Charley Tyler, you are Alfred Graves this year, and that's a new character for you to portray, is it not?
Yeah, it is. Last year I did his father-in-law.
Yeah.
I did Washington Cox last year, so this year I'm doing Alfred Graves, and so he was part of the Cox clan, but they all lived up in the what we now know as Cedar Hill area. But in their day, it was known as Cox's Crossing because they had a shuttle or a
ferry
across the river
there? Yeah.
Across the Animas River there, because at that time it had a lot more water in it than what it does now.
Right, right. Very interesting. And a ranching family too?
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. He'd been in ranching all of his life. I mean, from Texas to eastern New Mexico to then western New Mexico. They moved out here in 1877. And so they were some of the early pioneer settlers of this area.
Okay.
And again, it's, I've always enjoyed being in the Dining with the Dead series because you learn so much history there. But matter of fact, Alfred Graves, years ago I did the very first Methodist minister who was here, who was a circuit riding preaching man, and his first convert to the faith was Alfred Graves.
Oh,
which was kind of interesting, that you have those connections there between the stories.
Right. Well, and I think for all of us, now that we've done it for a few years, these names kind of circle back around, or names of previous characters come into other character stories, and everybody kind of knew everybody else back in those days because there wasn't a lot of people.
Oh yeah,
around
absolutely.
here when we were talking maybe I don't know, City of Farmington had maybe 200 people in it.
Yeah,
at turn of the century. So
it's that kind of an environment, and it is. You depended upon your neighbors to help you out, and your neighbors depended upon you to help you out.
Right.
So it was that give and take there.
Well, this was a pretty wild and woolly place in the late 1800s as well. We have lots of great stories about the cattle rustlers and the shootouts and the murders and the shootings and everything else too of another character.
Part of my story is the fact that Porter Stockton and Alfred Graves didn't always see eye to eye, and so it was kind of a shootout at Porter's house that ended up getting him killed, and Alfred Graves was leading that party over to his home. So that's part
the connection there.
Part of the story and part of the connection.
Right. And anyone who's interested in local history, I encourage you to look up the Stockton Gang and the stories about the Stockton brothers. In fact, one of them is part of our group again this year.
Ike Stockton,
a very popular character, especially when there's kids in the groups, to come and talk about what he was all up to. And of course, he has a little different perspective than the rest of us on his experiences, right?
Yeah, well, I always enjoyed doing the dress rehearsal for the kids from McKinley Elementary,
right?
Because sometimes it just talking with those kids, they're kind of in awe of some of the stories that it touches them as well.
That's true, and that is part of this, everyone. We're talking about Dining with the Dead. It is coming up again on Saturday, September the 7th at Green Lawn Cemetery in Farmington, 1600 North Dustin Avenue. But as Charlie Tyler was saying, we do a dress rehearsal usually the day before on that Friday, and they bring some of the school children over from the nearby McKinley Elementary School, which is right across the street almost. And so, and they go through the tour, and then we get a chance to practice our stories, basically. And they are sitting in awe, usually, about these stories of gunfights and cattle rustling and other things that are going on in the town that they know is just Farmington, New Mexico, and the place with the Target and the Sam's Club and the 2 Walmarts. They don't know that other place, right? So it's very different. Rebecca, you've been with us for almost 7 years. You weren't with us the first year, right? But since then, you've been hooked.
Oh, I have.
Right.
I have. I'm always impressed by the depth of the characters, and you think Farmington's just sort of out in the middle of nowhere with not much going on, but the people who settled here, who came here, and I've obviously always played women. They were filled with grit and determination. I mean, you just didn't make it here if you weren't. And yet they also were interested in things that we're still interested in educating their children and making sure that their families are fed well. I've played some rascally. I played Jane Stockton. I was actually on that porch when Al pulled up and shot
Right.
somebody shot me too, and
Wow.
I never quite recovered from it. And the other thing is so funny because I was Mrs. Allen one year,
Right.
and a year or so later, you played Frank, my husband.
Mr. Allen, that's right.
I look at you and sometimes think about,
Right, I know.
that was my husband one day.
That's true. That's true.
When we were alive.
But you're right, it is fascinating. And to learn about the early history of this community and the people and the families that helped to make it what it is today, from not so much that was here when it was opened up for settlement. Again, this is only in the late 1800s, like 1875 or so. And so it's really amazing. And these people that decided, well, we want to have doctors and we want to have a hospital. We want to take care of our people. And if they weren't going to do it, nobody's going to do it for them. And so that's how we got doctors here and how we got a hospital and how all these other things as we learn. We want culture. We want concerts. We want music. And so they did that.
Well, and the other, we also want to find a way to live in peace with our neighbors, the people that were already here when we got here. Right. So I've had a couple of characters that had some really lovely relationships with the native people here. It wasn't all, the old, cowboys and Indians with fighting each other. There was a lot of mutuality and learning from one another, teaching each other, us providing gifts and them providing their gifts and graces
Right.
to take care of each other. So that's a piece that I'm really interested in too.
Right. Well, and that talks a little bit about the character that I am playing this year, which is William Wallace, who's also known as Navajo Bill, who, again, came to the area because of his health. He had tuberculosis and wasn't expected to live beyond maybe a couple of months, and got to Farmington and lived for another, I think, a couple more decades at least, but had a very good relationship with the Native Americans, which is how he got his nickname of Navajo Bill. And there's a great story about how he would learn to speak Navajo and talk to the Native Americans as they would come into town and trade and things like that. And so it talks about what you're mentioning there. So it's really great. And for all of us, I want to ask us about the reactions we get, not just from the school children that come and see us, but even the groups of adults that come through the cemetery after having dinner on those tours and stop, and some of them are really intent on listening and learning about the history of this area. It's always fascinating to me to see the groups that come through. Charlie?
Well, I've always been impressed with the fact that sometimes people show up there and then they find out that, one of my relatives, y'all are doing a story about one of my relatives, that ancestors that I didn't even know the stories of. And I think also the Kiwanis Club does a good job of involving the Historical Society and helping get some of the information that we utilize for our skits. Granted, we can't tell the entire story. We only get 5 to 6 minutes to really share a little bit about the history of the people that we're in, and we try to be very cognizant of doing it in a very meaningful and respectful way in regards to the families, because we don't know everybody who's coming through, and knowing the stories that they might know. I had a big kick last year whenever I was playing Washington Cox, because I was up in Durango, Colorado, and I ran into a cowboy poet up there at the Bar D Chuck Wagon. And I just was so impressed with how well he was doing. And I told him I was doing Dining with the Dead, had to tell him a little bit about it. And I said, I'm doing a character that was raised in Cedar Hill. And he said, well, all my relatives are from Cedar Hill. Who you doing? And it ended up being, it was his great-grandfather.
See there?
And so this year I'm doing his grandfather. So it's like, it's just interesting that you find those connections in the area.
That's very true. And again, you're right. The research that goes into these stories that we tell are pretty checked out, and again, the stories that sound unbelievable but actually did happen, and they're well documented. And so it's really fascinating to be able to put all that together when we are telling these stories to folks. And again, it was quite a different place 120 years ago than we see it today.
Yes, I'm. My character this year, Alf Graves. I mean, when he moved here from Texas with Washington Cox, he kind of helped Washington move his herds here, because he was a cowboy working for Washington Cox and moving his herds in the area. But he had an ulterior motive, because he had kind of taken a liking to one of Washington Cox's daughters, and so when they got here, they ended up getting married, and he was 21 and his wife was 14. And so that's nowadays we'd think, oh my gosh.
Right. Yes, we would.
You read the story, but yet that's how things happened back in those days.
That's true. And again, it's interesting to put it out there and in perspective of what else was going on during those years as the community was founded and growing and things like that. Rebecca, I know you mentioned about always playing women, of course, but we don't know a lot about the early pioneer women, or many of the pioneer women that were in Farmington and San Juan County. So when we do find out about one of them, it's really, I think, fascinating to learn about some of the stories. And there have been stories about, couples that started out together, and maybe the husband died along the way to get here, and it was left to the woman, and usually a gaggle of children, to then fend for herself and themselves, and create a home life for a family and things along that line. Those stories are often the ones that we hear.
That's right. And it's particularly fun for me when I have the opportunity to talk to some of the heirs, progeny of the families.
Right.
I get, last year there were a couple of grandchildren from the character that I'm playing. And this year, that I actually met the night of the presentation, so I didn't really have any prep time with them. But this year I'm meeting with the McDonald family. That some of the folks are still in the area, and my character was so interesting. She had so many nuances to her choices and behavior in life, that I'm looking forward to talking with the family to get a little bit more kind of grounding, so I can talk about her in a way that fills in some of the gaps.
Right.
Yeah.
When I hear you talk about your character's story, it reminds me of maybe some of these folks that we see in a soap opera, of so many horrible, different, weird things that happen to them, and you're like, well, that can't be possibly based in any kind of reality. And then you hear a story like yours, and you're like, wow, this woman faced all these different things, and all these different things happened to people in her orbit and in her circle, and it's amazing.
Right. Well, for Lucille, her husband dies. She takes up with this man who's really on the run from a murder charge in North Carolina. He comes out, and in fact, what we think is that there was a relationship back in North Carolina before he followed her basically out here.
Okay, sure.
And then he gets sent back to North Carolina to be executed, and then she takes up with another mischievous guy who claims to be a friend of the previous. I mean, it's just, the web is so tight. And then, they end up going to Mexico and leaving the kids in a hotel in Tucumcari with a little bit of money. I mean, it's just, I want to go, what was she thinking?
Right.
What? So I'm hoping the family can shed a little light so I can share that with the folks on that Saturday night.
That would be great. That would be very fascinating. Again, we are talking about Dining with the Dead. It is coming up on September 7th, Saturday, here at Green Lawn Cemetery in Farmington, 4 to 8 p.m. $25, you get dinner and then the tour and the great stories from all the 12 actors who are portraying folks in the cemetery this year. And there are the names of some of them that you probably must know if you've been in town for any number of years, and a lot of these folks come back year after year, like the rest of us, to play these different characters. But there's lots of great stories, and most of them are around the same time. Most of them are around late 1800s, early 1900s. Although sometimes we venture a little bit into the maybe 1930s, 1940s, even as well. Correct?
That's correct.
And that's kind of what happens.
It was still a little wild.
It was still a little wild.
Getting close to the mid part of last century, it was still pretty.
That's true. And then you had the boom time in the 50s, and that was wild.
That's a whole nother set.
An economically wild time. So that's for sure. And I know, and every year I always like to point out that, some folks wonder about doing this in a cemetery. And I know some folks are concerned about that and are wondering why that is the case. But in history, what we have found is cemeteries were always places of celebration sometimes, and even some had bandstands in them, and there were concerts and other events and things like that throughout history. And so it's always done respectfully, but I think it's really interesting. And as you walk through, to me, it's always fascinating, too, to look at those gravestones and see some of the names of the families that are prominent in Farmington's history, and you kind of see some of those as well. So it is kind of more than just the history event that we do. It adds on to it as well.
Well, and we have more than just the actors that are portraying characters. We also have guides.
That's true.
Who are helping to lead the people through, because we do want to be respectful for those that, we're just not wanting to traipse across everybody's graves out there. And so they have specific routes that they'll follow through the cemetery, and I think that's important. I mean, we've had people that, matter of fact, this year, Ron Price is playing a character. And for years, Ron Price was one of the guides, helping guide people through.
That's right. This year he is Orange Phelps.
Yeah, and so we move into different areas sometimes, and it's just a matter of trying to be helpful and trying to be mindful of where we are at, and I think that's important as well.
That's true. For other folks, for our radio audience who can't see the images on the screen at the moment, I want to mention some of the other characters that are being portrayed this year, and some names you may be familiar with. George Coe is one of them. William and Clara Hunter will be portrayed by Dr. Eugene Schmidt and his wife Wendy, and that, of course, is the Hunter Mercantile name, and that's the Dusty Attic, I believe, downtown in Farmington, was that building. As we mentioned, Eliza Vaughn is going to be portrayed this year. Mary Elizabeth Blatchford, Maddie Wallings, Ike Stockton we've mentioned, Mose Blancett will be there, Lou Coe, and the many others that we were talking about, Navajo Bill, Lucille Albin McDonald, and of course Charley, your Elf Graves. So a real variety of folks.
Absolutely.
And personalities.
Absolutely.
That's for sure.
I enjoy, lots of times when we have our rehearsals, I enjoy hearing everybody else's stories because we don't get to hear those stories.
We're out standing in our spot.
Yeah, we stand in our spot. We don't get to hear the other 9 or 10 stories that are out there. So I enjoy the rehearsals.
That's true.
As much as anything else.
Is there one character you've portrayed, Charley Tyler, that stands out to you? You mentioned the Methodist circuit rider. Does that have some meaning to you?
That was really probably one of the most meaningful ones that I got to do because not only was he the first minister that moved in here, he actually donated the land that was used for Green Lawn Cemetery. He and his wife donated that land to the city of Farmington.
Interesting.
And so, I've enjoyed lots of the characters that I've done, though.
Right. And even the cemetery has a unique history, too. A lot of folks may remember that the first cemetery in Farmington was at the site of the old Tibbetts
Football field,
and where the track is, correct? And
That's
then they
right.
moved all the graves and everybody from that location to the Green Lawn location on Dustin, which is why some of those graves predate the cemetery and the stones because they were moved all there back when that Green Lawn opened. So it's fascinating. Rebecca, same question for you. Is there any character that stands out for you that you've enjoyed telling her story?
I really love Jane Stockton. She was married to Porter.
One of the Stockton brothers.
One of the Stockton brothers, and probably Porter was probably even more damaged and deranged than his brother Ike. Ike was sort of the charismatic, Porter was just a bad dude. But he took really good care of his wife and children. And so, one of the comments that she made was that, we always had good meat to eat. Of course, he rustled.
He was a
the
cattle
cows.
rustler, but they ate well.
But yeah, they ate well, and she stepped out on the porch that day with a shotgun when the posse was coming to get her husband, and tried to divert that. She got shot, he got killed. So, and she went on to live a number of years after that. But she was quite a gal.
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to really love the Lucille McDonald character. She's still being in
as you learn more about her.
Oh yeah,
right?
She's really great.
Nothing shocks you, I don't think, as you read about this woman.
I'm not immune to shock.
Okay, all right.
She's really pretty interesting, and I'm wondering about what was going on behind the scenes in her heart when she made those decisions. So
right.
It's good.
Very fascinating. Well, it is Dining with the Dead, everyone. It will be at Farmington's Green Lawn Cemetery, again, coming up on September the 7th. So we urge you to get your tickets now to support the Kiwanis Children's Projects. Again, tickets are available at Howard's Cleaners, which is right across from the cemetery where you will be. Dinner's served from 4:30 until 6. And from folks who've been through it, again, I think they really all enjoy getting to have their meal together and then going through with these tour groups and the guides.
Well, and then some people will bring their actual chairs so they can sit and listen to the stories. There are very few chairs that are provided for those who need to sit. But certainly,
you have a camp chair, folding chair.
If people have a folding chair and want to bring it along, it makes it probably for a more comfortable evening. Every presentation is about 5-6 minutes long, so
times 12 or 11.
11. This year we've got a couple of groups that are doing combinations, playing off each other. We have the
that's right.
Dr.
Hunters.
Dr. Schmidt and his wife are doing the Hunters, and then there's two ladies that are playing off each other as far as that were involved, and so
the temperance ladies.
Yeah, temperance ladies.
Them,
So
right.
with a hatchet.
Oh yeah.
And going after the barrels of wine, I think they're just so
moonshine.
Exactly.
But so it'll be a great tour, and certainly encourage everybody to come out and learn a little bit more about the history, but enjoy the evening.
Right, that's true. Yes.
Can we go back just for a second to talk about the respect of
sure.
of the space?
Right.
We are, I'm clergy, and I do funerals
right.
on a regular basis. And I just did one yesterday and talked with the gathered body about how you keep the person alive is by the stories that we tell about their life and their impact on us, at least here.
Mm-hmm.
know, what happens on the other side of the grave is really not our business, but what happens here? And so, you know, I think it's really faithful what we're doing by telling the stories of these lives and how the communities work together to resolve issues, to take care of the land and each other. So in some ways, what we're doing is absolutely the opposite of disrespectful. It is really honoring the people and the early settlers of the community and the people that come along behind. We learn from each other. And the stories that we tell are the things that help form us. So I'm an advocate of telling stories, keeping life going, and that's how we remember people best.
Amen.
I agree. I think that's a great thought and a great way to end our program on this great event, because we all are a part of it. We've been a part of it for almost all the years that it's been going. Charlie and I have been there for 7 years, and Rebecca, this is your 6th year. So again, it's a great community event and a great way to honor these individuals and the families, even that are still here, with what they've put forth in the community and help the community to grow. So September 7th, we hope you'll join us at Green Lawn Cemetery, everyone. It's Dining with the Dead. Tickets are $25, are on sale now, and they support the Kiwanis Club. All the proceeds go to the children's projects from the Rio del Sol Kiwanis Club. So we hope you'll join us. They will sell out, I can guarantee that, and they do every year. So don't say we didn't warn you. And there you go. Thank you all for coming in this morning. I appreciate it very, very much.
It's our pleasure.
Thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Scott.
We'll see you at the cemetery.
You bet.
All right. Dining with the Dead here on KSJE. I'll be back with more, everyone, in just a moment. The time right now is 8:37. Did you enjoy that podcast? We hope that you did. And if you did, share it with your friends. And if you really want to keep podcasts like this coming, please support KSJE. You can do it easily online at ksje.com.